I think that's a really tough thing, and I can understand why the players would be frustrated by that. I didn't personally feel like there was a lot of fouling going on. I think, if you look at the regular season, you kind of let that play out. Then in the playoffs, the players are looking at the refs expecting foul calls. The refs are looking at the players going, well, we're letting you guys play it out. There's this strife all the time. I think for the NBA, it's a strife that's really magnified because it's so intense and it matters so much from play to play. Obviously, we've seen in the NFL recently with the Saints game in the playoffs how refereeing can cause huge impactful decisions on these games. But in the NFL, it's like a moment. It's like a big moment. All eyes are on that one moment. In the NBA, it's like these calls happen up and down the floor constantly throughout the game, and the players are always jawing at the refs. And I think for the fans, it's like they don't even really know what is a foul and what isn't a foul because the players are pissed about everything, whether it's ticky-tacky, whether it's a hard charge, whether it's a good block, whether it's a slap across the wrist. The games are called so inconsistently, and I think that's what magnifies itself here in the playoffs then. Certainly you have Harden, who feels like he was wronged, and Chris Paul obviously feels like it was the wrong call. I don't know really how to think about this, Justin, other than the fact that the referees and the players probably need to get together throughout this off season and say, we've got to come together on a more appropriate set of rules that we can all at least somewhat agree on, and then have an agreeable decorum on the court so that the referees have this ability to make these calls and the players need to stop bitching about it all the time. Then you go the other way and the refs swallow the whistle and the players are upset about that. That's, to me, the biggest problem with the NBA refereeing is that, in football, you get these big catastrophic moments where the fans just feel like everything's been either gained or won. But in the NBA, it's constant. It's this up and down the floor. It's on offense. It's on defense. It's ticky-tacky the whole way. And so you don't have necessarily, I guess it's magnified in the end of the game. You feel like we talked about in March Madness with Virginia. But I just feel like it's constant enough to where they've got to come together and start making a rule book that they can both agree on, and then the players need to shut up.
Boy, you just opened Pandora's box, and that's a great topic for the offseason for us to get into, of how good the NBA product is and how it's growing, but how they're hurting themselves by just what you said. Every single play that there is a foul called, someone is complaining to the ref. They can knock a guy down and he could have an open cut on his head, and they'll be like complaining about it. So that's definitely something that they're going to have to look at this offseason, because I agree, it is hurting the game, and it creates an inconsistent feel among the fans that they don't know what they're watching because there's always somebody mad about a call. But in this particular instance, in that last play, I didn't have that much of a problem with the no call on the Harden three because of how he pushed off on Draymond Green anyways. He cleared Draymond Green out by a good 3 or 4 feet, and in order for Draymond to get back to contest the shot, he then had to sort of break the rule of verticality where he didn't go up straight and he had to sort of jump into Harden, and Harden's jumping forward. So at that point, the officials could have just as easily called Harden for an offensive foul for the way that he forearm shoved Draymond Green off of him. So he has no room to complain about that call at the end. The stuff with Klay Thompson earlier in the game where he had his back turn jumping into him, that call has been consistent through the regular season, that the refs have made that call and put shooters on the line with 3 free throws. So again, they have to find that they can't referee games in the regular season one way and then turn around in the playoffs and say, okay, we're going to ref them completely different. If you want to make a rule change, either way, either you don't like that rule and you're going to stop calling it, or you're going to call it all the time. You can't call it sometimes and not others, because again, that inconsistent feel is what we talk about. And the more, I'll keep saying it, the more that they bring and legislate in sports gambling in this country, this stuff is going to continue to just be put under the microscope every time there's these situations, because it's not just swinging games, it's swinging millions of dollars at times. So the NBA has been on the forefront of all about gambling. They're going to have to do something to clean this up, and they're going to have to get their officials to be more responsible and to be more consistent on the floor to make sure that they're not letting games get out of control. The Rockets just today on Monday have already released this detailed analytical report that only the Rockets would do, that goes into all this detail about the missed calls and the fact that the Warriors just constantly get away with fouls, and the referees continue to sort of, it makes it look like they are favoring Golden State based on this report. And the report basically says that it should be the Rockets who were in the finals last year. So I expect in game 2, Eric, that the whistles are going to be a little bit more in favor of the Rockets. This is what we see in the playoffs. coaches, ownership, GMs, they all try to find ways to work these officials. And the Rockets just unleashed one of the better tactical ways to try to get in the referee's head by releasing a report that says they've been favoring the Warriors for X amount of games over X amount of years. So I think that has to come into play when they get to game 2.
Yeah, completely agree. I don't have much to add there. I mean, even after game 1, the NBA comes out and says the referees got 2 no calls correct in the final seconds of the Warriors game over the Rockets. But then they also come out and say, well, a couple other calls were wrong and possibly even Steph Curry should have fouled out. You can't have that stuff going on. Like you said, it's a product that the fans have to trust in and believe in, especially when you add in the gambling. You can't come out a day later and say, well, these guys should have fouled out. These guys shouldn't have fouled out. This should have went this way. This should have went that way. You want to talk about the ability to damage a sport quickly. Let that keep happening.
What do you think about that 2-minute report? I feel like it doesn't add anything. All it does is either irritate the fans that lost. Either side's going to just be pissed off when that report comes out because it's going to look like, okay, you're admitting you missed these calls, but it does nothing for us right now. The Rockets still lost this game regardless of how many calls did the officials say that they got wrong. So their fan base, what does that do for them at that point outside of what you said? Just create sort of more chaos and another day of another cycle of news that's going to just churn this thing out, talking about the officiating instead of the play on the floor.
Yeah, it's a really bad precedent. I actually don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's a cultural thing. It's this need to be right instead of getting it right. But again, how productive is it? How productive would it be if we released that after every game and there was just this constant drama about who should have been where and who should have won, who should have lost? I don't really think that that's necessary. I mean, we've been doing that for 2.5 years over the United States election for the president, talking about, well, we should have won and we should have done this and the Electoral College is broken and all that stuff. No, you lost. Donald Trump is the president, whether you like it or not, whether you voted for him or not. Stop pissing and moaning about it. A system that was in place during the election, everyone agreed upon the principles when you went into it. You don't get to cry about it when it's over. This is the same thing in the NBA. You don't get to put out a report after every game so that the losing fans get to piss and moan and cry about it. It's a terrible precedent.
No, I'm right there with you. I would rather just see them scrap that 2-minute report. If you want to do it, just keep it among the GMs on the team. If the Rockets want to use it as a motivational tool with the fact that, hey, we could have easily won this game. If they want to do that for themselves, great. It doesn't need to be public, though. It doesn't do anything. All it does is create more animosity. If the referees go into Houston and they continue to make these calls, you never know what that could lead to with their fan base now getting this riled up. I just don't see the point in that. So one last question for you before we end here on segment 1 with the NBA. Chris Paul made contact with an official late in this game, got his second technical, was ejected, but he's not going to be suspended. Fined $35,000, but he won't be suspended for game 2. But I got to ask you, Eric, it wasn't that many finals ago. The Warriors lost Draymond Green in a finals game for contact to LeBron James under the belt. Now you have a player that makes contact with an official, definitely not as egregious as what Draymond did, but it's still an official that he's bumping, and I think he definitely made sure that it was a purposeful bump to let him know he wasn't happy. But no suspension for Chris Paul. If that was Draymond Green that had made that bump, do you think there's a suspension for game 2?
Yep, I do. I think if it's Draymond, I think if it's some other players throughout the league, you get a suspension for that. I think if it's Chris Paul, you don't. Maybe that's just how it is. If your reputation precedes you, you get the benefit of the call or you don't. I don't like it because from a moral standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, if you're going to have objectivity, it can't be, well, this guy has this level of benefit that this guy doesn't. That's not equality of players on the floor. So I don't really care who you are. If you're bumping an official and you have an aggressive action toward an official, LeBron James, Steph Curry, Chris Paul, doesn't matter. You're out. You should get that 1-game suspension.
It goes right back to the consistency piece. You can't suspend some players for doing it and then not suspend another one because of his stature in the league or because of he's in the Players Association and he's the president of that, or he's doing State Farm commercials, or you suspended Cliff Paul, or whatever you want it to be. You can't make calls at some point in the regular season on everybody else, and then in the playoffs, when it's magnified, when you have the most eyeballs on your product, then you don't do it because I guess you don't want to affect the series, but then you just affected a series a few years ago in the finals. I just don't see, again, the NBA is in a position where they are just making money. The popularity of the game continues to rise, not only in the U.S., but internationally. you've got everything going the way you want it to. You cannot ruin it by putting out this impression that there's something else going on behind the scenes. You just have to create more consistency from everybody down, from the NBA to the officiating. That's something that they have to work on, Eric, or they're going to ruin this product. And it's going to be a lot of negativity that gets thrown around, similar to what you see with the NFL. The NFL fans are not all that happy with a lot of the things that go on. That's why Goodell gets up and gets booed every time that he gets a microphone in front of his face and fans are around. It's almost become this product that the fans just constantly are upset with. The NBA seems like they're on a different platform right now. Fans seem to actually like Adam Silver and like some of the things and initiatives that they put in place. But that can all go away if there continues to be inconsistencies in their game. All right, that'll do it for our NBA wrap-up. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the NFL draft. What we talked about in episode 244 happened on Friday night. The Dolphins get themselves a new quarterback, and we'll talk about NASCAR at Talladega and what went down there on Sunday. All right, we're back. Let's jump into Talkworthy. Let's talk about what happened on day 2 of the NFL draft. And story we talked about that we thought would happen, that we correctly called, because we said Josh Rosen was either going to the Dolphins or maybe a team like the Patriots would jump in there and get him as a backup because they need a quarterback. But the Patriots end up drafting a quarterback in round 4 in this draft, as we also thought they might do, that they would get themselves a quarterback in the later rounds. So Josh Rosen, now a Miami Dolphin. So do you like the move for the Dolphins, Eric, and do you like it for Josh Rosen?
Well, I do actually on both accounts, because for Rosen, it gives him a chance to make a second impression, and he's only 2 years in, right? So the second year, I think he's still plenty fresh enough that this is not really that big of a deal for a young quarterback, and he gets a whole new place, a whole new scenery to make an impression. So I think for him, this really works out, as long as he gets rid of that apparent condo that he had, and he's trying to actually get Kyler Murray to take it off his hands, which was kind of funny. But for the Dolphins, I think it's great. I mean, yeah, you brought in Ryan Fitzpatrick, but he's been a journeyman. He may or may not be any kind of solution long-term either. So you take a very low risk. You didn't give up a whole lot to get Rosen. That was maybe the baffling part for me, is how little Arizona got for a guy that they had just drafted so high the year before. However, either way, they got what they wanted in Kyler Murray, and now the Dolphins got a chance with a potential franchise QB. So all in all, Justin, I think every side in this deal, from Arizona getting a go with Kyler Murray and the Dolphins getting a go with Josh Rosen, everybody should be happy.
I think Josh Rosen should be very unhappy, and here's why. I think that he's a candidate to be traded next year at this point. He's going from one of the worst rosters in the league to the new Arizona Cardinals, which is the Miami Dolphins. I think their roster is one of the worst rosters in the league. For the Dolphins, I think it's a great move because they get themselves a quarterback very cheap, no risk really involved in this deal. If Josh Rosen doesn't work out for them, it's part of their plan anyways. They're going to have the top pick, if not a top 3 pick, to go get a quarterback that they desperately need to start things over again. If Josh Rosen happens to work out and show some promise, then they got him for a late second-round pick and a 5th-round pick in 2020. But from Rosen's standpoint, Eric, he's going from one of the worst rosters in the league in Arizona to a team in the Dolphins that have been stripping this roster of players and talent basically since their season ended. And when you look at their skill position, it's not good. They even got rid of Danny Amendola, so that contract's off the books. Devontae Parker's still in the roster, but they seem to be doing everything they can to not play him at this point. There's just not a lot of talent on this team that's going to be around him. So I don't even think Rosen's going to be able to showcase much. I think it's going to look a lot like last year, where he's going to be on a team, not a great offensive line, not a lot of skill position players around him with a ton of talent or experience. He's probably stepping down at running back from David Johnson to Kenyon Drake. So I'm worried about Rosen's career progression at this point. I feel like it's completely probable that when we start 2020, Josh Rosen is in a different uniform again, because the Dolphins are going to be so bad that they're going to be in a position to go get a Tua, to go get the next quarterback that's going to step up this year that maybe we're not even talking about. So that's my fear for Rosen. For the Dolphins, it's a great move. For the Cardinals, Eric, they completely screwed this up. They tried to get cute, and they tried to hold Rosen back, and they tried to act like, well, maybe we're not going to take Kyler Murray, and we'll keep Josh Rosen, and he's a great quarterback, and he's our guy, and he's handled this so well, and this and that. They knew they were taking Kyler Murray. 2 weeks ago when they had 4 or 5 teams involved that Steve Keim said they did, calling them, I think they could have gotten better.